We complete our discussion on him against the background of our basic idea concerning the meaning of loyalty. As last Sunday, I'm reading from the translation by Moffat. Come, all ye that thirst, come to the waters, come and eat, O fainting souls. Buy food for nothing, wine and milk without money. Why spend your money on what is not food, your earnings on what never satisfies? Listen to me, and you shall see the Lord, the Eternal, says. We ended our discussion last Sunday with the development, the unfolding of the idea of the suffering servant and the tremendous insight that had come to this unknown prophet of the exile as he wrestled with the meaning of a simple purpose and commitment conceived originally along lines limited and narrow, and as that began to unfold and unfold and unfold until finally he arrives at the great concept that Israel, its role, the suffering servant, and all who enter into that fellowship, whatever may be the dimension of their need or the acuteness of their experience, stand in immediate candidacy to fulfill the moral significance of the suffering servant. By their stripes you are healed, and I'm healed. By our stripes they're healed. It's curious, isn't it? Now the prophet has to work out the implications of that. And here we are faced with a very difficult and involved insight, and I hope I can make it clear as we work along. The suffering servant the moral responsibility of the individual, the group, is measured in terms of the qualitative significance of the individual's opportunity. Well, what the prophet is saying is that through a long, rather fitful and sometimes terrifying history, in a manner that is strangely miraculous, the living Spirit of the living God brooded over Israel, and Israel moved down across the ages always in some intimate and primary spiritual struggle to see if the commonplace aspects of life, measured in terms of great divine events which express the movement of God in history, might give to them, Israel, an accumulated spiritual wisdom and power that increased their sensitiveness, so that they would be aware where others would be insensitive. They would feel where others had no feeling. They would know what the meaning of God is in human life, because they had a sustained exposure with that Spirit through all the fitful years of their amazing and miraculous history. And this primary exposure to God, however we may explain it, placed upon the people who had the exposure a great responsibility. It's very simple. So we see two movements going along. One, moving at this level, the moral responsibility that comes from moral privilege, the spiritual responsibility that comes from primary, sustained spiritual exposure to the movement of the mind of God. That not for yourself merely are you to enjoy this. Not for yourself was this done, but all of life has a meaning. That life is not an accident, not a mere incident, but there is a divine movement at the very heart of existence that is working out a process, the beginning and the end of which are encompassed by the sweep of the mind of God. And if in that process you seem to see yourself more and more involved, then by virtue of that involvement, your responsibilities increase. By virtue of that involvement, you must be eyes for the blind. You must be health for the sick. You must be freedom for the captive. It is to that end that you had this exposure. You see? Well, everybody who is caught under the aegis of a tremendous responsibility wishes sometimes that he could just be an ordinary individual. You know, you get tired of carrying a load. Or do you? You know, you just want to be yourself a little. Just yourself, so that everything isn't loaded. I remember when I was at Howard one day, a freshman, and it would take a freshman to do this. A freshman decided that he would like to invite Mrs. Roosevelt to come out to talk to the freshman class at a little tea. So he went down to the White House and invited her. And she came, which I suppose that the nerve of it just left her flabbergasted, but she came. And I shall always remember the little talk that she gave to the freshmen. She talked about her family and how and what a very trying thing it was to give the Roosevelt children a certain sense of just being ordinary children. She said, you see, any move that any son of mine makes, or any move that, I guess there's a daughter, yes, and any daughter of mine makes, becomes at once something that is interpreted in terms of the great responsibility that the president has. And my children, again and again, said to me, if we could just be children, but always there is something more attached to whatever we do. Now that's a quality of the feeling that is expressed here, that this responsibility, because of gifts or whatever it is a responsibility that is inescapable and for which there is no letting up. Now, why that is true is not a part of our process this morning. But here it is. So the suffering servant is the suffering servant because he has had opportunities to understand and know the mind of God. And nothing walks with aimless feet. All the raw materials are involved in some creative synthesis that is inescapable for the mind and for the growth of personality. All right, now, hold that development in mind. Now, let's go back. While this is going on, another process is taking place also. The captivity, the Babylonian captivity has taken place. And people who were high and mighty, some who were of great economic privilege, some who were prestige-bearing members of their society back in Jerusalem, when they were taken into captivity, they were just captives. Babylon had no interest in the prestige-bearing members of the society as that society functioned back in Jerusalem. But here, under the swiftly, in which for the emergence and the articulation of the prophetic doctrine that everybody is equal. You see? For as long as the doctrine of equality had to wrestle against the formal, prestige-bearing inequalities in the climate, then the persons who talked about equality, following the inspiration of the prophets, found themselves operating in an environment the unanimous judgment of which stood over against any notion of democracy. But suddenly now, the environment says, by historical incident, what the genius of the prophets had been insisting upon all the time, even when the environment was dominated by various kinds of cults of inequality. You see? All right. And as soon as the environment made it seem rational, follow me, rational and expedient that men within the Judahite community were equal, then an ethical awareness began emerging. For, you see, if the equality is a gross equality, this kind of equality, if all men are equal, and you see they began including the Babylonians, you see, too. You can't, for if I ever decide that the thing that makes me equal to you is something that is far more significant than the difference between me and you in groups, then I throw wide the door for every human being stands then in immediate candidacy for the same kind of equality. So the Judahites could not be excluded. I mean, the Babylonians could not be excluded. Now, when this equality began being experienced against the background of the prophetic insight, then at once the same great social insight that the prophet is talking about, namely this responsibility which the group has because of the privileges that the group has enjoyed, now is transferred to the individual. If I am equal, then it follows that I am responsible. And if I'm responsible, then it means that I am responsible. I can't say, you see, that Israel is responsible. I can't say that, but I am responsible. If I'm equal, then that fundamental sense of equality, that fundamental awareness of equality expresses itself immediately in terms of responsibility. For the greatest tribute that can be paid to the integrity of my personality and the dignity of my person is to assume that I am worthy to be responsible for what I do. And if I am responsible, then it means that I'm a man, not a child. And if I'm responsible, then this equality of responsibility becomes the overtone of, number one, the equality precipitated by captivity. Number two, the equality that is grounded in the insight of the prophets. Now let's look at that for a minute, and then we have two more steps to make it through. Now the equality of the prophet at first applied merely to the community of Israel. It was an equality as sons of Abraham. An equality that was rooted in David, that sprang as a great, never-ending stream from the loins of Moses as the tradition moved. But here they began to see that an equality that is based upon any kind of belonging, any kind of group relatedness, is an equality that in the very nature of the case becomes a first-rate expression of a cult of inequality, as far as anybody who doesn't belong to the group is concerned. So, the logic of the insight means that the equality has to be established on some other basis. Could it be established on the fact that this group of Judahites had this unique experience with God through the ages? Could that be it? Well, if that is it, then the thing that is significant about the experience that Israel has had with God is to be measured in terms of those persons in Israel who have responded to the mind and the Spirit of God. And you remember last Sunday we talked about the distinction that appeared in Deutero-Isaiah that all the Israelites were not of this quality, but there appeared a moral principle moving straight through Israel that divided it into two groups: those who are responsive to the will of God and sought to reproduce the will of God in their relationships, and those who are unmindful of it, even though they were the seed of Abraham. Now this same principle begins to apply, you see. The thing then that establishes the equality in terms of moral character is to be found in the degree to which they are responsive to the wooing and the movement of the Spirit of God. Well, if responsiveness to the Spirit of God becomes the criterion, then that responsiveness cannot be confined to any race, any clan, any group. Wherever there are men who respond, whatever may be their particular background or religious orientation, whatever may be their culture or the persuasion of their climate and environment, if they respond, they qualify. My house, says the prophet, shall be called a house of prayer, not for Israel, not for the Judahite. My house shall be a house of prayer for all nations. Therefore, and I'm almost through with this now, therefore, the logic of it is, you see, that everybody, not merely the Judahite, but everybody stands in immediate candidacy for an ultimate and limitless exposure to the mind and the will and the purposes of God, and the degree to which each individual becomes involved in that. To that degree does that individual become the living, for instance, of the intent of God. Of course, all of that means that social responsibility is related to social privilege. Advantages are related intimately to responsibility. Where does that leave America? Where does that leave us? Is it because God is playing some kind of favorite that he has given to us over so long a time the opportunity to live in so fair a land? Because he likes us? Has pulled us out from the great scramble and set us here that we might grow fat and stolid and lazy, self-centered and egotistic? Do we rate this? Is there anything in our history that should give us comfort this morning that we rate this almost terrifying blessing that is ours? Or does it mean, if the inside of the prophet is sound, does it mean that inasmuch as all of life is involved in ends and purposes that are part of the dream of God, and if it be true that God is the God of history as well as a God who transcends history, as I devoutly believe, then it means that we must relate the great and limitless privileges of ours to responsibilities. We must be eyes to the blind, food to the hungry, strength and courage to the skinned and cast down masses of mankind, not because we wish to involve them in the political or economic machinations of our little minds, but because we, as a result of the logic of our opportunities and privileges, we are under the judgment of God and the judgment of history to make our days redemptive for mankind. And if we don't, there is no power on earth that can stay the movement of the relentless logic of antecedent and consequence that will level us. didn't ask for it, but we have it. And given it, we must do it now. The same thing and the same principle, you see, becomes operative for the individual. Do I have advantages? What do they mean? Do they mean that I should think that I'm better than you? That I should thank God that I'm not as other men? Does it mean that I should take unto myself all the credit by saying, well, if other men were as clever as I, if other men were as smooth as I, then they would be where I am? Or does it mean that I must measure my privilege in terms of my responsibility? And if I don't do that, if I don't do it, very quietly, or perhaps very catastrophically, the light goes out in the sky, and life becomes for me a grinning skull and crossbones. No God, no values, no meaning in experience, nothing but the gross and stark survival of the temporarily strong against the time when they shall become permanently weak. And my loyalty is measured then in terms of my self-conscious commitment to that kind of moral cause that will not let me be at ease as long as there is fear and depression and bitterness and meanness and injustice anywhere. And in my quiet moments, I may find welling up within me a sure sense that what I'm trying to do in my little way, where I am, God is at work doing in the limitless reaches of human history. And when that awareness comes, I know then for myself that I am his child. And he's my father. Nothing else matters.